And welcome back to the booth here at Mythic Championship, #1 from Cleveland. That is Paul Ciano, Marshall Sutcliffe, and we're heading into round number 2 of Booster Draft here early in the morning. We watched Mike Sigrist draft. We watched round 1. Did not go well for him, but we're going to see him again. He's 0-1. He's facing off against Francesco Hugony from Italy. He also had a bumpy start to his draft, and we're going to get a chance to see if Mike can right the ship and get things rolling, or if it's going to be that disaster 0-2 start from what's ultimately a pretty good deck here from Sigrist. So let's head on down. It's time for round number 2 here from Cleveland. Hello and welcome back to coverage here of Mythic Championship 1 from Cleveland. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Paul Ciano. It's our great pleasure to bring you coverage of round number 2, where in the feature match area with their draft decks in hand and ready to go, we've got Mike Sigrist. He plays for Team Channel Fireball, and he, of course, is a MPL, a Magic Pro League member as well. Take a look at Siggy, as he is popularly known. His opponent sitting across from him, Francesco Hugony from Italy. Now, both of these players, Paul, had a bumpy start. They are 0-1. Mike ended up facing off against Thiago Saporito, who had an excellent-looking Simic deck with a little bit of a splash for white. And he kind of got rolled. That was not an easy round 1. So he's really looking to try to kind of get things back on track here against Francesco. Now, on the other side of the table, Francesco, he's drafted, well, at least ostensibly what you really maybe you're a little scared of if you're Mike. The fastest deck in the format, Rakdos. How good of a version does he have for Mike's Azorius deck to play against here?
Taking a look at it, I think if you're Rakdos, you're ultimately going to end up in a pretty reasonable spot during the draft. It seemed like there weren't too many people fighting over it. Now it looks like there's 2 Rakdos drafters at the table. He's got a good combination of removal, but the quality of his creatures might be a little bit subpar. He's got a couple of filler cards in there, but I think this is the type of matchup that Mike can actually fight a little bit better than the powerful Bant deck, I guess, that Thiago Saporito had. Thiago had hard-hitting creatures that would just ultimately be bigger and overcome the defensive creatures like Senate Courier that Mike Sigrist had. But this is a Rakdos deck. The creatures are a little bit smaller. Mike can actually block, and he has a lot of ways to gain life in his deck, too, with the triple Sphinx's Insight. So I think this is going to be a little bit better for Mike.
Yeah, he's already got 2 of those cards in his hand, 2 Sphinx's Insight. And look at this, no 1 or 2 drop here from Francesco. So if you're sitting in Sigrist seats, you are absolutely thrilled with that. He does have to lead with what's probably the worst card in his deck, the Prowling Caracal there. But you know what? It still blocks. It still may trade off for something from Francesco. And if that's what it does, great. He's in good shape. Francesco really needs something here, though. No 1 or 2 drop is going to be brutal. That means, the Spectacle engine not rolling, the damage isn't flowing. And Sigrist, he already, I think, is in a decent position just based on the fact of a very slow start here from Francesco.
Yeah, and this is a format specifically. You're talking about how the Caracal is one of the worst cards in Mike's deck. It's because in this specific format, 1 toughness creatures are much worse. The reason being is, in Orzhov, you have the Afterlife mechanic. So anytime a threat trades, they're left with a 1/1 Spirit token. So then having that 1/1 Spirit token, being able to trade with one of your actual full cards that you have in your deck that have 1 toughness is a very bad feeling. On top of that, there are incidental ping effects in the format too, in the form of cards like Footlight Fiend and also cards like Daggercaster.
Yep, Carnival is an easy way to just kill something cheap. It looks like he's going to go for a Roustabout here. And Sigrist, he's looking at the board and he's saying, okay, if my Caracal trades off for this Viscopa Vampire, that's fine by me. If it trades off for either of these creatures, that's fine by me. And so he just says, sure, you got it. Draws his card for the turn. Now, this is an interesting situation here for Sigrist as well, because he does have 2 copies of Sphinx's Insight, and he could start casting them and gaining the life, but it looks like he wants to leave the shields up, perhaps valuing holding a card in his hand that he could cast at instant speed instead. Francesco clearly respecting the possibility of a counter spell here by announcing each creature and holding it up on the stack, certainly not assuming it's just going to resolve.
Right, and yeah, opting to go for the haste effect here.
So Sigrist does end up playing the Sphinx's Insight, though he's not going to gain the 2 life as a result.
Interesting. It looked like Mike really valued the ability to bluff a counterspell there in Thought Collapse or Quench, but he didn't actually have it in his hand.
No.
And given how it looked like he's kind of relatively behind on board, that is pretty interesting.
Now, the Riot ability there on that bottom creature, he did give it haste, right? The Burning Tree Vandal you see, and he actually discarded Amplifier to it.
Right, and I think the creature that he wants to trade with the most is the Burning Tree Vandal, but because there's a lot of pressure on the board, I think Mike really just wants to get the most power off the board currently.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if that comes back to bite him, the fact that he just decided not to take the 2 life there.
Right.
Because he could be 2 life higher.
Yes.
And he would have given up the ability to bluff that counterspell. How important was that? Well, I don't know. I mean, the red-black deck kind of just plays out its stuff.
Yeah, the red-black deck doesn't really have the ability. I mean, you can't really just like play around cards like that. You just need to keep putting pressure, because if you just pass to play around counter magic, you're playing exactly into the style that the Azorius deck wants to play.
That's right. Now, this is going to be a good spot here for Sigrist because he's actually reduced the attack force down to nothing here. Francesco can attack with the Roustabout, but he has Summary Judgment that he can fire off to kill it. There's really nothing that black-red can do about that effectively, so he will be able to kill it. And the Concordia Pegasus is going to hold the Vandal at bay just by virtue of blocks. So good spot here for Sigrist. He is starting to stabilize this board. He has plenty of card draw. This is one of those interesting situations, Paul, where the route is very clear for Sigrist. Very, very clear that what he wants to do is prolong this game, period.
Yep.
He's got another copy of Sphinx's Insight in his hand and Precognitive Perception. He has infinite cards if the game goes
his deck
for a
is
while.
not short on ways to draw cards.
Yeah.
And if you noticed here, he actually had Summary Judgment and Slimebind as ways to shrink that Roustabout, but he has a Thought Collapse in hand and really wants to be able to use it on a spell that Francesco might play. But he goes, Smelt Ward Ignis, not worth it.
Nope. So now he's going to Slimebind, but again, Sigrist very much using his life total as a resource here, taking 3 damage there, giving up 2 damage 2 life gain the other time, and he's now down to 12, but in a really good position.
Yeah, he's in a great spot because now he has the option to cast Summary Judgment. Summary Judgment, and also have counter up.
Yeah, really nice spot for him. And look at this, right in time as well, because Francesco just drew a Rakdos Firewheeler, and he has the mana to cast it. I believe, does he have another mountain somewhere? Maybe in his hand. If he doesn't, well, then fair enough. But honestly, at this point, Sigrist probably wants him to put it on the stack so he can counter it. Yeah, he does have a mountain in his hand.
This is the best Concordia Pegasus I've ever seen.
Yeah, this thing is just holding
creatures.
down the fort. Yeah, Francesco could get very aggressive and steal it, but doesn't really get him anywhere. So he's just going to have to sit for now and try to resolve the best stuff that he can. Yeah, really tough spot here for Francesco as well. I mean, if those were 2/2s, he could just jam them in, get in for 2, and then finish it off with the Firewheeler, but they're just not. They're 2/1s.
And this is, so yeah, there's one thing you could consider, which is attacking with both of these 2/1s, losing a creature, then using the Firewheeler to finish off the Pegasus, but that's so risky.
Yeah.
Mike Sigrist has like 6 cards in hand. One of them has to be a counterspell, right? Or some kind of a trick.
And Francesco has been very cognizant of that, and this is probably good enough. This Scavenger can sacrifice the Roustabout and create a 5/5 with a Scry 2. Wow, look at this. Sigrist says, sure. You got it.
Yeah, because Sigrist also has a Law Mage's Binding in hand.
Oh, he does. Okay. So it's only the Scry 2 that he's giving up here. Then.
Right.
Fair enough.
And now Francesco doesn't really have a good attack, and now Mike will be able to fire off one of his very powerful card draw effects. It'll interesting to see if he's going to go for the Insight here or the Perception. He does have Precognitive Perception, and he really just needs to find lands.
Yep.
So he might just want the raw cards and just choose to draw draw 3 cards here instead of using the Insight.
Yeah, it is interesting because with Perception, if all you need are all types of cards, then you're not punished as much. But when it gets later in the game where lands really lose value, then you're really incentivized to play it on your main phase to get the addendum effect.
Right, but the way Mike loses here is kind of stumbling on land drops.
Yep.
He has so much to do already. I'm not sure that he actually needs that Scry effect on the Perception.
Yeah, great call, Paul. That is exactly what he's going to do. He just says, look, I don't care what give me 3 lands, fine.
Right.
So let's see if he found some lands with that. Boy, did you find another Sphinx's Insight? Yeah, he did. So he's drawn all three.
They
this
do chain
game.
well together.
Yeah, they find the others, don't they?
Right. And now if Mike is in a situation where he's going to have to discard, he is just going to fire off that binding on his main phase so he doesn't have to discard. And it looks like that's what he's doing.
Yeah, and now that Thought Collapse is just looming over this game here from Francesco, who's very aware of it as well. And Sigrist has maneuvered himself to a beautiful position with his control deck, and it just feels like Francesco doesn't have anything he can do at this point.
Right. Again, that that Pegasus, wow. Just doing so much work.
Brick walling the whole team here.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said when you are casting creatures with Riot. You know, what do you do? Do you put the counter? Do you put the haste? You know, the Vandal is in a really interesting spot because the more times you get to rummage, that's a very powerful effect by itself. So he did want to kind of increase the quality of his draws, but at the same time, by not putting the counter on the Burning Tree Vandal, now it's just kind of staring at that Pegasus, hoping it's like, why did I do this to myself?
That
I really wish I was
all-star Pegasus now
right.
earning Bedevil, and of course,
and then
Mike has to protect it. He can't let his Pegasus die.
Classic protect the Pegasus strategy.
Oh
here.
yeah. So a Fireblade Artist and a Macabre Mockery hit the graveyard. Excuse me, for Francesco. That's good knowledge for Sigrist to be aware of, because a card like Fireblade Artist is one of the annoying cards that can lead to a lost game on a game that you've actually stabilized the board. Yeah. And Macabre Mockery is good to know about. I mean, that is a type of card that doesn't see a ton of play. It can be a powerful swing if timed properly, and that is a card that Mike will play around for the rest of the match, for the next game and if there's a third.
Yeah. And one thing to note is, you look at that, right? You look at the Bedevil on the Pegasus, and then the Thought Collapse. You're like, why would Mike use counter magic on something like that, right? Because you're trying to protect your Pegasus. But keep in mind, Mike has 7 cards in hand. At this point, he's at the point where he just wants to just empty out his hand and use his mana every single turn. That's how he's going to win this game. So, he's got multiple Thought Collapses in his deck as well, and he has more ways to draw cards in his hand. So it's going to feel really bad if he doesn't go for the Thought Collapse there, keep it in hand, and then Francesco doesn't play anything else, because then Mike will just have kind of wasted that 3 mana that he had access to.
Also, Mike has really gained a lot of information about what's going on the other side for Francesco, because Francesco, he's trying to, old school Magic players say he's trying to mise, right? Like he's trying to play a Smeltwort Ignis, sack, to take away one of your smaller creatures, or use Macabre Mockery to kill you out of nowhere. He's just trying to kind of get you. But when a player like Sigrist gets a chance to actually see these things happen and anticipate them, he can really play around them, and that is Mike's wheelhouse. I mean, he will set himself up so that he can't lose. He will narrow down the outs that you have, and he will play around it. And I really like Mike's chances in this match now, given that he's gotten a chance to see the random ways he could lose.
And that is kind of the trademark for what separates maybe good players to great players. One of those, the ability to really just put yourselves in situations where, how can I lose? I am up 5 or 6 cards of my opponent. How can I play so that no matter what, my opponent cannot come around, come back and get me.
Look at this. This is super interesting. So Francesco attacked with the Smeltwort Ignis. Mike blocked, and Francesco did this sort of pause and said, yeah, sure. So Mike knows now that something's going to happen to his Chillbringer after, namely the Rakdos Firewheeler. And so Mike is super smart, and he's going to cast this Fairy Duelist before damage to make sure that it doesn't take damage, and instead he only loses a 1/2 flyer rather than the 3/3. What a smart play from Sigrist, because he could have said, okay, sure, your guy dies, and then, okay, you might finish it off later, but it's going to take a whole nother card, and Mike is just one step ahead of the game.
Absolutely.
He's good.
Yeah, he's all right.
Sigrist is good.
It's got to be so annoying. You kind of need to be fair to make it into the MPL.
Into the MPL, yeah. By the way, this is Francesco's 5th time at the Pro Tour, or maybe it's actually his 6th. He's played in 5 prior to this. So, compared to somebody like Sigrist, who's been Player of the Year and stuff, he has far less experience at this level. But that being said, Francesco's actually had quite a successful GP career. He won GP Mets just a couple of years ago in 2017. And he has a solid win rate at GPs as well at 60%. So not an inexperienced Magic player. He's played 48 Grand Prix in his life. But at the top levels, he doesn't have nearly as much experience as somebody like Sigrist. Look at this savage clock now from Siggy. 5 power. Watch out. That's most of the power in his deck, by the way.
That's like a third of the power in his deck.
Yeah, when I asked him, I said, how much power total does your deck have? And I knew he wouldn't have it offhand, but the first thing he said, he goes, do you count the one from Resolute Watchdog? And I said, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Yep. You know, the only 3 like consistent damage sources are the 2 on the board plus the 4/4 flying Sphinx of Foresight. Yeah. Everything else is, it can. I mean, like the Pegasus can attack, you know, the Senate Couriers can attack, but they're just sort of chippy little sources of damage.
Yeah, I fully expect if Mike is the one who's going to win games, it's going to be kind of a grind. It's going to take some time for him to actually turn things around, because the way he wins is slowly grinding ahead on cards with all the card draw effects, using your Law Mage's bindings and removal, and then ultimately winning the game with just, you know, some small flyers here and there.
You know, I should say, Paul, I was talking about the experience these players had at the Pro Tour level. Well, we're at the Mythic Championship level now, and they've both only played in this one, so I guess it's equal footing.
You're right. I guess you have me there.
Yeah. Mike is considering a double block on the Rakdos Firewheeler, it looks like.
So one thing to note is that there are not actually great combat tricks here that would actually have Mike. Like, Mike has, I believe, a Summary Judgment in hand. And
that's helpful.
Right.
That's very helpful.
He has a Summary Judgment in hand, and there's not a lot of pump effects in Rakdos, right?
Especially not for toughness.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you can get +1/+0 in first strike, but that is not saving you here.
Exactly.
Also, Francesco did not discard, right, to the Vandal, so he likes his hand right now. It looks like what he has is a Scorch Mark, which, again, will put Mike to the test of saying, do you want to fire off the Summary Judgment before damage? And it looks like Mike says, yeah.
Yeah, so Mike chooses to block first, then fires off the Judgment here, knowing that nothing can really happen there. But he wants to make sure he gets the blocking ahead of time in case Francesco has a removal spell.
And it turns out it was a Dagger Caster, and that would have been devastating if Mike had not once again seen through this and used the Summary Judgment proactively. Now, the good news for Francesco is that did work out well for him, because the 1 damage plus the Scorch Mark still allowed him to kill the Chillbringer. So nice play there for Francesco, even though Mike minimized it as much as possible.
Right. And now Mike only has that Arbiter in play as his only form of offense. So if Francesco can draw a removal spell, he might be in good shape if Mike doesn't have a way to counter a removal spell that
good
Francesco
shape
might have.
is
something. Didn't see that
even
one.
then, like even if he's like, get the point your Arbiter, it's like take 2. Right.
It is take 2, but remember, we talked about how Mike doesn't have a lot of power in his deck.
That's true. Yes, he is not going to clock you back very hard.
Oh, look at this attack.
That's a chippy little attack there from the Dagger Caster. Sphinx of Foresight could just eat it, or Mike could block it with, be a little more conservative and block it with the Night Arbiter, or he could be completely reckless.
The best
and
part
not
about
block
this is I don't even know what's in Francesco's hand, but I like this attack.
I do too. You know, I think that Blade Brand would be the card that I would consider the most if I was Sigrist. And he didn't block it.
Yeah.
He's just so like on top of all this stuff. It's incredible. Now he gets to really start to generate advantage from the Sphinx of Foresight by scrying. And remember, he has a 3rd copy of Sphinx's Insight in his hand to go as well.
Yeah. I will also note that Skewer the Critics could also be the type of card that Francesco could have if Mike blocked with the Arbiter.
Yeah. Or even with the Sphinx, he might just be willing to 2-for-1 himself to get rid of the Sphinx, I suppose.
Right.
But in the meantime, a lot of lands off the top of the library here from Sigrist, but he's looking at a 3-turn clock now, and that's why he took the damage. He's like, why risk my creatures on board? I'm going to be drawing a bunch of extra cards. So it does look like he's actually, you know, kind of flooding out. Wow. Oh. Really flooding out at this point. He's actually got more cards than 3 in his hand, but I think the other 2 are lands as well.
And given that Mike has drawn nothing but lands... Oh, this must be
weird.
I'm assuming that was before blocks.
Okay, because Mike said I block, but I think that Francesco must have said, hold on a second or something.
Right, okay.
Let's see if he goes down to 7 life or if that block actually happened first. Because, yeah, Francesco wanted to just kill that and attack,
Of
right?
course, of course.
I mean, you technically could attack and then kill it, but
Right.
similar situation. It looks like Sigrist is staying at 9.
So keep in mind that Sigrist is flooded, but Sphinx of Foresight does allow you to scry 1 on your upkeep every turn, and he did top.
Yeah, he kept a Law Mage's Binding. Yeah, that was a little strange because it doesn't look like Siggy actually took the 2 damage there. So Francesco let him block and then fired off the Grotesque Demise, which cost him 2 damage.
Right.
Sigrist still looks like he's in really good shape, even having drawn a bunch of extra lands. And at this point, he's willing to fire off the Law Mage's Binding on basically anything just to make sure his life total stays as high as possible. So the 2-power Dagger Caster is going to pick it up. And now Sigrist is just 2 combats away from winning this first game.
Oh, that must feel bad. Topped again.
Top. Yeah, it's getting a little sketchy here. I think that even Francesco would admit that the advantage bar has swung fully away from him at this point.
And one more card.
Was that Electro Dominance?
I think so, but is that enough? If it's not enough, I wouldn't cast it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not.
It's not, okay.
Boy, but that 2 damage might come back. Now, he could, though, kill the Sphinx of Foresight here, which, you know,
right.
That's enough for that.
I would guess that Mike likely kept like a Thought Collapse or something on
right,
top.
because he didn't play it.
Right,
yeah.
he didn't play anything.
Let's see if we have any insight into that.
Oh, and he did.
Look at you, Paul. Still got it, buddy. Still got it. And now Francesco says, hold on, wait, he's letting him scry?
Yeah.
And then he's going to fire off Electro Dominance?
Right.
Well, I'm not in love with that. I mean, he does make Sigrist use up 3 of his 12 mana or whatever on his turn, but a scry is a valuable commodity at this point.
Right. And Mike at this point probably, I mean, he's going to use the Thought Collapse here.
Yeah, it doesn't matter anyway.
Right. But there is something to be said for, hey, is there a way I can pretty easily win this game without showing him the second Thought Collapse?
Well, you know what else he was doing, I believe, is I think Mike was saying, do you get that trigger that lets you cast a spell for free even if I counter it? Right.
I don't think.
And you don't.
Right.
It's all attached to the resolution of the spell.
Right.
And I think Mike was checking because that could have been a thing where he goes, okay, I counter that, but he says, but with my free spell, I get to use Get the Point or something.
Right.
So
it is not, in fact, a cascade spell.
No, it is not. Yeah. It is all at once. So that is going to be game number 1, going to Mike Sigrist with his control deck as they start to consult their sideboards. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, though, we'll have more live Magic for you here from Mythic Championship 1 in Cleveland. Don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome back to coverage here at Mythic Championship 1 here from Cleveland. We are at Magic Fest Cleveland, by the way, directly next door. There's a Magic Fest happening, including a Grand Prix, and things are starting to kind of warm up for that as the players are arriving on the scene here on Friday. They get to play side events and get their favorite cards signed by their favorite artists, meet some of the Magic personalities from the Magic community. All that kind of stuff is happening right next door. And it's pretty cool because now that involves coming over and checking out the Mythic Championship as well.
Right, absolutely. And also on the flip side, for these Mythic Championship competitors, if you don't have a good day, when you don't make it into day 2, you can actually just enter straight into the Grand Prix and play tomorrow.
Yeah, I was thinking that if I had a bad day in the booth, I might just...
Okay.
If they don't bring me back for day 2, you know. It's a limited GP, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, that is kind of in your wheelhouse.
I'm interested.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather be here.
Yeah,
yeah. So if they'll have me.
I mean, the first Mythic Championship, you have to do it.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll stay. All right, you convinced me, Paul. But yeah, really cool to have this. I'm really curious to see kind of how it goes. I mean, this is the first time we've had, a Mythic Championship level event directly adjacent to something as big as a modern current Grand Prix / Magic Fest.
Thousands of people are going to show up.
Yep.
Curious what the crowd's going to be like on Sunday, when people come in to watch the top 8 of the Mythic Championship.
Should be fun.
Yeah.
In the meantime, though, we are well and truly down to business here at the Mythic Championship. We're already into round number 2 here on day 1. We've been following along with Mike Sigrist as we watched him draft his deck. It came together nicely, ended up building a very controlling Azorius deck with no splashes. And he found, he ran into the buzzsaw in round number 1. Thiago Saporito, boy, not only is his deck great, but he played very well in that game and ended up casting Biogenic Ooze in both game 1, a little later, and pretty early into game 2. And that card simply took over the game. Tough matchup for Sigrist, so he lost that one. But now we're in round number 2, and this is his chance to kind of get things back on track. And I have to say that this matchup looks much better for him than the first one.
Absolutely. His creature, like Concordia Pegasus, was basically a dead card against Thiago Saporito, but in this matchup, it basically gained him something like 10 to 12 life over the course of that match. And I think just the cards line up much, much better for Mike in this matchup. I'm really curious to see how Thiago does with that deck, though, because that deck looked pretty special.
Would not bet against Thiago 3-0ing with that one.
Yeah.
Not that he's necessarily a favorite to do so, but that deck was yowza.
That was one of the best, I'm going to say, Biomancer's Familiars deck that I've seen. Triple Aeromunculus, Gatewing Spy.
I mean, he didn't even know what it did, and he still won. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Looks like Francesco's really deep in the tank on whether to keep this opening hand.
Oh, you can't keep that. Your Rakdos deck, there's 2 removal spells and 5 lands. You're playing against controlling Rakdos deck. Wow. How are you expecting to win the long game
you can't.
Against Mike's deck here?
Oh, he has to just run exceptionally well. Basically curve 2-drop into 3-drop here off the top of the library. And instead it's go. And once again, we see Mike Sigrist sit here go, oh, wait, you haven't cast anything, and it's turn 2, and now your first play of the game again is a Vizkopa Vampire. This is just the dream situation for Mike. He's going to pass the turn back. The life gain from Vizkopa Vampire is nearly irrelevant in this matchup from Mike's perspective, so it's a 3-1 for 3. I mean, that's not a great creature.
Yeah. However, Mike doesn't actually have a creature to block with, and Vizkopa Vampire actually very reasonable if your opponent doesn't play anything.
That's true.
Because you do get those big life swings. But as you alluded to, the life link not very relevant in this specific matchup because Mike has an extremely controlling deck. He has currently a hand full of removal spells. He did have a Law Mage's Binding, but chose not to use it. He might use a Sky Tether, however,
I think he will.
Vampire.
I think you do and just leave up Thought Collapse. Francesco very aware of Thought Collapse this entire time. And Mike's going to leave it up. In this case, Francesco could have cast Daggercaster on his turn and chose not to play around Thought Collapse. So Francesco playing very carefully, does it once again. But, I got to go back to game number 1 where you mentioned this play pattern. It plays right into what Sigrist is doing. You just can't. This is why this this needed to be a mulligan.
Right.
Right, is that you need threats so that you can just jam them and run your opponent out of counter spells. Now Sigrist is just in this beautiful position. I mean, he's so happy with the way that this game's gone.
Yeah, this is just not how you want to. This is not the strategy for the Rakdos deck. I mean, I could see some variations where you have maybe a more controlling Rakdos deck. But again, in this specific matchup, game one was a grind. You knew exactly the type of deck that Mike had. He had multiple counter spells, multiple ways to draw cards. The only way you're realistically going to win this matchup is by having an aggressive start.
Once again, Sigrist, it says, okay, fine, you can have the Scavenger. And his reasoning is very sound. He has the answer in his hand with the Law Mage's Binding, and while he isn't excited to give up the Scry 2, that's kind of the transaction that he's having here, he can deal with the Scavenger. It's still just going to end up being a 1-for-1. In this case, he's going to cast Precognitive Perception once again to just load up his hand. I think he wants to find some islands here.
I think he really wanted an island to be able to play Law Mage's Binding and keep up Thought Collapse, but I'm not sure that he actually got there. So this might be like a one-turn window where Francesco could potentially resolve something.
He does have a blue source with his one guild gate, but yeah, you mentioned it. Oh, he's reconsidering.
He's like, should I just take 5 here instead? But keep in mind, Mike Sigrist did see an Electro Dominance too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he
needs
to be careful with his life total.
Yeah. Well, and then that's the interesting part, is that he needs to be careful with his life total, and this is why he's favoring the counterspell so hard, is that he has answers for creatures, even if there's a Scry 2. And the difficult thing for him is to prevent, some of the big game-ending things that he could face from Francesco. Cards like Electro Dominance, but there's other cards in this color pair that would be really problematic for Sigrist. Here's the Gore Clan Wrecker now. And Francesco is getting in. Wow. That is one of the few times I've ever seen that. The only time you see that card get haste is if it's lethal, right? If it's just like, well, I'm killing you right now.
That is the common play pattern with Riot creatures, for Limited specifically, is you just almost always want to be putting counters on your creatures. It's almost always worth it to have those extra combat stats on your creature, unless you are going for lethal.
You get that damage back so quickly, and the Menace with the extra point of power is really powerful. That said, Francesco may have a line of play here that allows him to just pile on as much damage as soon as possible and really kind of punish Mike.
Yeah, and this actually ends up paying off for Francesco, giving it haste because he got in those 2 points of damage.
Yeah, so nice work for Francesco, chipping away. These little edges really do add up. Mike also uses up a Law Mage's Binding. And now is the way clear? The answer is no. And so what? Francesco's just going to pass turn back.
Has Mike drawn a creature yet?
He did just draw a Chillbringer off the top of the library. So, hallelujah. He does have enough mana to cast it and leave up that Thought Collapse as well. Right now, though, it's a little awkward.
Looks like
he's going to play a Night Arbiter, which makes way more sense because right now the Chillbringer's not actually tapping down anything of relevance.
It would just be a 3/3 flyer.
Yeah. And he'd much rather use his mana in this way. But he has Thought Collapse mana up, plus a really nice blocker/attacker. And once again, we see Sigrist slowly start to pull ahead.
Okay, and taking a look at Francesco's hand here, he can actually play Scorch Mark and clear the stage to get the Night Arbiter off the board. And given that he has a Scavenger in play with 5 power, he can return the Viscopa Vampire from his graveyard to his hand.
That's nice.
That's nice, but it looks like he didn't go for that. And is now in a very, very tough spot here. He has to use 2 of his removal spells to get this Arbiter off the battlefield, or he can just choose to play it a little bit more patient and hope that Mike does play out a creature that he can just kill 1-for-1 with that cleared stage.
But this is the problem. This is what you described, Paul, in the last game and that I alluded to at the beginning of this game, is now Mike just drew a Sphinx's Insight, and it's just not going to get better from here for Francesco. That Sphinx's Insight will find more lands, more Sphinx's Insights, more life. It's just, it keeps getting worse and worse and worse if you let Mike Sigrist play his game plan.
And that's a Thought Collapse.
Yep. That's 2 Thought Collapses. He has all 3 in hand now.
This is
Francesco might not resolve another relevant spell for the rest of the game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And part of the reason for that is the keep. He just didn't have any pressure. The matchup's also just tough for Francesco in general, and the way he's chosen to play allows Mike to play this game. And now the only bottleneck for Mike is blue mana at this point.
Right. But this is interesting. Immolating Shaman actually
Kind
pretty
of
good
annoying,
here.
yeah.
Pretty good here because, you know, Francesco is a bit flooded. It's a nice little mana sink here. So, yeah, Mike Sigrist doesn't have another removal spell, so he's going to use the Thought Collapse here on that Immolation Shaman. Now, of course, Francesco can choose to get it back with that clear to stage, but currently doesn't have a great target. You know, you don't want to just be using a clear to stage as a raised dead. You want to actually be able to kill a creature. Does he have the mana to do everything, though? I think he does.
He does. He has that Scorch Mark still in hand, right?
Okay, so yeah, he's going to do the same thing. Get back to Shaman, use the Scorch Mark to finish off the Arbiter.
Okay. I mean, this looks kind of fancy. It's not ultimately, like, great for him.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction, but I mean, he did have to burn the 2 removal spells to kill the 1 creature, even though he did get a card back, so he ends up being neutral.
Right. If Francesco had the mana there to run out that Shaman as well, when Mike didn't have access to the Thought Collapses, maybe that would have been his avenue to victory, but...
I love this. Sigrist is just going to play Chillbringer onto what is ultimately an empty board at this point. He's got the Resolute Watchdog there to protect it as well.
Yeah, I mean, that Watchdog is very important at saving one of Mike Sigrist's 3 win conditions.
Yes, it's true. That Watchdog is on Chillbringer duty, it's on Sphinx of Foresight duty, and it would have been on the Azorius Night Arbiter duty, but no. Mike lets this resolve. Interesting, so he must have an answer. No, he doesn't. I lied. He was thinking about it, and it does get Thought Collapse. I did expect him to, so I was a little surprised there, but also he could have drawn an answer in between. Wow. Do they ever play around the 3rd Thought Collapse?
I know I wouldn't.
I wouldn't either. I think Francesco is going to be in pedal to the metal mode. He could just actually cast his Dagger Caster. It just doesn't do anything at this point.
Right.
Can't attack even through the Resolute Watchdog, so he's just going to hold on to it, which makes a lot of sense.
Now Mike finally able to start attacking.
First blood.
Yep.
Now what? Oh, the Caracal. Yeah, the Dagger Caster has a purpose.
Dagger Caster will now be cast.
Yeah, and I think that Mike will just let that happen, by the way. I don't think that the Caracal is a card that he's super interested in protecting at this point. Let's see if he does. This is a little interesting.
Yeah, I think you let this resolve because you just take the 1,
I do
and then the Watchdog just cleanly blocks the Dagger Caster.
Yeah, you lose your Caracal, but shrug.
Right.
I guess Mike's a dog lover and has no love for the...
Yeah, and now Mike does have a way to attack, but, you know, he's only got that 1 last Thought Collapse as protection, so if Francesco can string together, you know, 4 or 5 strong spells in a row, he might have a chance.
4 or 5 strong
spells
in
we're
a
looking. We're looking.
Wow, Paul, you're definitely on the optimist end of the spectrum. I can tell you're a real glass half full kind of guy. So is Francesco, though.
Right.
I mean, he kept a 5-lander here.
Yep.
Things kind of had to go well for him to win this game, but they haven't. They've gone average, I would say.
All right.
Is Sigrist ultimately going to run out his
Fairy Duelist
as an attacker?
I think so. It does cut down the clock. This is now a 4-turn clock instead of a 5-turn clock.
Yeah.
Attacking for 4 times will be lethal here.
Yep. It didn't look like the Fairy Duelist was going to be a relevant combat trick at any juncture anytime soon, so he just ran it out. The big follow-up. No, it's a Concordia Pegasus. That does not change the clock, does it?
It does not.
3, 4, 5, still a 3-turn clock from this juncture. But he's got another blocker.
Right, just an additional threat, just making it that much more difficult for Francesco to come back.
He is down to just Island and Thought Collapse, so Sigrist still with that last line of defense, but there's nothing after that.
Yeah, but Francesco, like, what can he even draw here? If he just draws any small creature, that doesn't even matter. So the only removal spell doesn't matter as well because of the Resolute Watchdog. So the only thing Sigrist is concerned about is, you know, a very powerful spell, which Francesco can't have too many of.
Does this even matter is the question, and I think the answer is probably yes, just because it can attack on the ground. Sigrist is well ahead on the life total race, and he could just take some hits.
I actually like this play. Mike lets this resolve because he's like, look, I don't think you're going to have enough damage. I am very concerned about Electro Dominance. Look at how much mana Francesco has on the battlefield. So I'm going to let this resolve and still put you on that 3-turn clock. And then, you know, if you come close to lethal just from attacking, I still have that Watchdog as a chump blocker for the Firewheeler.
Yeah. Interesting decisions here down the stretch as Mike has to manage his risk the best way he can. He's saving that Thought Collapse for cards that he could not otherwise deal with. And you see Francesco playing out every land, and that is going to give Mike Sigrist the signal he may have Electro Dominance in his hand. As it turns out, he just has another land.
Right. But, I mean, counting the mana is also, like, very interesting, right? Because then you kind of...
I love it.
You could bluff it, right?
I love it, yeah.
Like, what are you at? What are you at? Count my mana, what are you at?
Yeah. I think that was Grotesque Demise off the top of the library for Francesco, which actually does deal with the Chillbringer here.
It does.
And the Watchdog don't matter.
Right. With the Grotesque Demise, Mike will have to use the Thought Collapse, I believe, because his avenue is getting in with his flyers.
I wonder if he counts up and says, okay, if I use it but I die to Electro Dominance, then does he use it, right? Because that's what Mike doesn't want to happen is that. Interestingly, the Benthic Biomancer, this is why it's a totally serviceable card. Even at this late stage, he's kept that island in his hand. He can just loot it away, which is really nice.
But if you notice, he didn't do it right away because he has drawn millions of planes, and he only has that 2 blue mana up, so he wants to be able to Thought Collapse.
Yeah. It's just interesting because that island is in his hand.
Yes.
But he drew them in the wrong order.
Exactly.
So all the planes are on the battlefield. And Sigrist, again, going to play it safe. And this, by the way, is an interesting thing to note from Francesco, because either Mike's very happy with his hand, or he has a Thought Collapse.
Right. So this is a very interesting situation. I think Mike's probably...
And look at that count.
Right. And Mike's probably going to start off by adapting the Benthic Biomancer. Oh, no, he
I would have done that too, but he decided not to. He's just going to go for Thought Collapse.
He's like, this is my win condition. The thing is, Francesco is not in a position right now where even if he draws Electro Dominance, that it's a lethal attack, or that it's a lethal spell, right?
Yeah.
Because he can do it for, it looks like, 9, and Mike is currently sitting at 14.
And Mike counted that, by the way. Yeah, he knows what's up with that. So here it is. It's time to kind of hold your breath if you're Mike Sigrist. He only needs to get one more attack in to finish off this match and get to 1-1 here at the Mythic Championship. But he does need to get to that point, and now the shields are down. He doesn't have a Thought Collapse or any way to prevent a spell from resolving. So let's see if Francesco can draw some game-winning, game-swinging plays. Another swamp. So Mike Sigrist holding his breath, and Francesco says, I don't have anything. And Mike never even needed to use the Benthic Biomancer to pick up that match. 2-0 there for Mike Sigrist. So well played and well done by him to kind of get back on track after a rough start against Thiago Saporito.
Yeah, I think this was kind of the ideal matchup for Mike. Kind of a Rakdos deck, but it didn't look especially aggressive as well. And if you're just kind of trying to play this attrition-y matchup against the blue-white control deck, basically, with all the card draw spells, it's just not going to go well for you.
All right, take a look at some of our back table action here. I see Brian Brown-Duin is playing against Yuya Watanabe, 2 Magic Pro League players facing off here against each other here in Cleveland. And what are we looking at here? Oh, boy. It looks like BBD has been saving for a rainy day. He's got 2 copies of Azorius Locket on the battlefield, just ready to unlock a lot of cards for him. Now, what's going on the other side of the battlefield, though? I see an Aeromunculus, a copy of it from Replicate that looks like it got Law Mage's binding.
Is that a Clear the Mind?
Yes, it is.
Wow, this is a very interesting
BBD go
deck.
deep? Did he do it? Because he has.
You don't play Clear the Mind and not go deep.
No, that's true. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, when you see a player play Clear the Mind, it means one of 2 things. They really know what they're doing, or they do not know what they're doing at all. And in this case, I think we know the answer to that, since it's BBD. He's got Lumbering Battlement and the 2 creatures and the 2 lockets on the battlefield, so not a huge build-out for him, but it is holding things at bay.
Right, and keep in mind, Yuya is currently sitting at 4 life. If that's correct, the Aeromunculus is currently a 3/4, so that battlement is representing lethal. And is he just going for it here?
Justiciar's Portal.
Okay.
To prevent the card draw?
Well, because this is a lethal attack, so now he has to chump block.
Attack. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. This is really interesting. This is game 3, by the way. Yuya Watanabe well and truly up against it here against BBD, who somehow just has this 4/5 lumbering battlement. Apparently, BBD only has about 6 creatures in his deck.
Wow.
He told Maria earlier that it was that his deck was wasn't sure if it was good or bad, but it's definitely sweet.
Yep, yep. And Yuya really needed to chain together some creatures with that Guardian Project on the battlefield. But I think he's just got lands and an Essence Catcher in his hand. So this is a lethal attack. Brian might crack one of these lockets to try to find maybe a counterspell of some sort, just for protection.
This would force the issue from Yuya if he had a bounce spell or something like that to send that battlement packing. So BBD, once that locket resolution goes, he's going to know that the way is then clear,
right,
and that he's very likely to win the game here, because there's no way that Yuya can just say, yeah, sure. Yeah. So that's going to be a sigh of relief there from Brian Brown-Duin, because, well, he's going to win now.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so it was not the card that I thought. What is this?
Oh, wow.
Whoa.
He's got Angel of Grace, and there's Absorb from Brian Brown-Duin.
He recycled that, too, off the Clear to Mind. It was in his graveyard.
Oh, that's insane. So BBD is able to finish off 2 games to 1. Angel of Grace in hand there for Yuya Watanabe. Would have done good work trading off for that battlement and providing him with some life gain later on, putting him back up to 10. But it was not meant to be, and it was Brian Brown-Duin who finishes off the fellow MPL competitor there.
Yeah. Ooh. Wow. Yeah, because when he cast that Clear of the Mind, he had an Absorb, a Sphinx, and a Sphinx of Foresight in his graveyard. Those are the 2 cards that like really stuck out to me. And then he drew that Absorb again after the Clear of Mind.
So, yeah, I wonder, so he drew it either off the Clear of the Mind, off of his draw step, or he could have drawn it off the locket?
Right, right.
Because in that case, Yuya would have really rather just said, okay, fine, I'm just going to cast this thing, right?
Right. Yeah, I guess given that there is a very good chance that Brian could have drawn some kind of counterspell there, it might have been better to just fire off that Angel in response to the sacrifice on the locket.
Interesting stuff. And, of course, these are the decisions that our players have to work their way through all the time down in the feature match area here at the Mythic Championship. Welcome back to the booth, by the way. Marshall Sutcliffe with Paul Cheon. And, well, we're already 2/3 of the way through the booster draft here on day 1. Things go fast at the Mythic Championship, and that's what's happening here. Right now, we've watched Mike Sigrist play his first 2 rounds, and he split them. So he ran into a pretty tough matchup, and then he was able to beat that Rakdos deck pretty cleanly. What do you like for Mike's chances in the 3rd one?
You know, actually, it's weird because he has good removal, but his inability to really close out games and I feel like his deck just has bad matchups. So if he runs into, for example, another Simic deck, he could have problems, or a deck that has enough removal to just clear out some blockers and get in. So, you know, if he runs into, for example, the other Rakdos deck we saw that looks like it was a little bit stronger, he might have some issues. So I think it's going to be kind of close.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that and all the other stories developing here from Cleveland. For now, we're going to take a short break, but after that, Rich and Maria at the news desk.
everybody. Welcome back to the news desk. Maria and Rich hanging out with you as we watch some draft this morning. Brian David Marshall is out on the floor right now with MPL member Martin Yuza.
Brian David Marshall here with Magic the Gathering Hall of Famer, Magic Pro League member Martin Yuza. Martin, it's quite a pod. You know, you wake up, maybe you're not quite ready for round one. You're a little rusty. You're drinking your coffee, and then you look at your pod. Tell us about when you sat down at this draft pod.
You sit down, look around, and the person passing to is Paulo. There's Shota, Jeremy Desani, Taruya. There's Tim Wu. It's like a pretty stacked pod, 3 MPL players. And yeah, Paulo was passing to me, so I didn't expect to get too many good cards or whatever. But it's working out pretty well so far.
Do you do anything different when you sit down at a table like that at a Mythic Championship where everybody is there's 6 people here who are capable of playing on Sunday, and 2 people that may very well be capable of playing, you just don't know yet?
No, like I'm just trying to read the signals and be in the guild that nobody else is in, just so I can just get all the cards, because everybody's gonna make sure that they they have a good deck themselves, and nobody's gonna give you any free you're not gonna get 10th pick Plague White or something, because everybody knows the pick orders. So I'm just trying to read the draft and make sure that I'm in the guild that nobody else is drafting, or not the people in front of me are drafting.
Now, this has been a really interesting draft format. New stuff's coming out all the time, and I can imagine you're one of those guys that really likes the dove and acuity, clear the mind, prying eyes. Is that what you're doing in this draft format?
Yeah, that's usually not what I'm doing. Just give me some 2 drops, 3 drops. My deck is Rakdos aggro. I have two Ill-Gotten Inheritance, 3 Fiends, the 1 drop into double Acrobat, and a bunch of 2 drops. Some removal, the good old 2 drops, 3 drops, tricks, and some removal.
You've been doing that since you top 8'd Pro Tour Austin, right?
Yeah, I mean that's just how I like to play limited usually. Of course, it's sometimes I'm gonna play something different too when the picks are going that way or whatever. But usually it's just me drafting a good curve, good creatures, and good removal.
All right, something I want to ask you about. You talked about that card Ill-Gotten Inheritance. I know it was your first pick of the draft. This is a card that I think has exceeded people's expectations when they first looked at the spoiler for the set, but also a card that sometimes people put in the wrong types of decks. Can you explain where you think Ill-Gotten Inheritance belongs in this draft metagame?
Yeah, Ill-Gotten Inheritance is a card that you need to have in an aggressive deck. Don't put it into Gates or something where you start on turn 4, you play your first creature, and you need to pressure your opponent and make them just start not. They basically have to race you, which is a good thing for an aggro deck. So it's a really good Rakdos card. It's really good in Orzhov too if you have a lot of 2 and 3 drops. It's not good if you're Orzhov with lockets and some control-ish build, but it's still okay. But don't put it into Gates or something like that. Yeah.
All right, Martin, you're 2-0 in this pot of death. Who are you expecting to face here in the finals?
I'm not actually sure who's 2-0. So I think Shota might be, Jeremy might be 2-0. Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'll just hope that I draw well with my deck and curve out 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, Inheritance, and it doesn't really matter who my opponent is.
All right, Martin Yuza here at Mythic Championship Cleveland.